Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're talking about a tiny sliver of water in the Middle East that, believe it or not, pretty much holds the entire global economy in its hands. It's a place where one wrong move could spark a crisis felt around the world. So, you might be asking yourself, how could a conflict thousands of miles away really have a direct impact on my life? Well, let's break it down. It all comes down to one number: $150. Some analysts are saying that if this waterway got blocked for even a single day, the price of a barrel of oil could shoot up to $150. And that's a price hike you'd feel everywhere: at the gas pump, in the grocery store, really in the cost of almost everything you buy. This is the story of the Strait of Hormuz. You can think of it as a geopolitical tripwire. A single misstep here could set off a chain reaction with massive global consequences. Okay, let's get into it. All right, first up, to really get why this place matters so much, we have to talk about the sheer scale of what we're dealing with. It's kind of mind-blowing. The Strait of Hormuz is the textbook definition of a geopolitical choke point. Picture a massive 8-lane superhighway for all the world's oil, but then suddenly it squeezes down into a single lane. At its narrowest point, the whole strait is only 21 miles wide. And the shipping lanes themselves? Just 2 miles wide in each direction. That's an incredibly tight squeeze. And through that tiny channel, an absolutely staggering 17 million barrels of crude oil pass through every single day. To give you some perspective, that's enough oil to fill over 10,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools every single day. So that's 17 million barrels a day. That works out to about 30% of all the oil that's traded by sea across the entire planet. Let that sink in. Nearly 1/3 of the world's seaborne oil supply is funneled through this one extremely vulnerable spot. And it's not just about oil either. The strait is also a superhighway for liquefied natural gas, or LNG. A full 30% of the world's entire LNG supply sails right through here. We're talking about a vital artery for heating homes and powering industries all over the world. So, who are the main players in this high-stakes game of geopolitical chess? Let's take a look at the major forces at work here. Okay, at the very heart of all this tension, you have two regional giants, Saudi Arabia and Iran. They're locked in this decades-long struggle that's a mix of geopolitics, religion, and just a raw fight for who gets to be the dominant power in the Middle East. As the leaders of the Sunni and Shia Muslim worlds, their rivalry goes way beyond their own borders. And then, of course, you have the United States. As a global superpower, the U.S. has huge interests in keeping this region stable. The goals are pretty straightforward: make sure the oil keeps flowing, protect allies like Saudi Arabia, and keep Iranian influence in check. And that's exactly why the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet is based right here, a very clear projection of American military power. Now, this rivalry, it isn't just a Cold War of words. It gets hot. It spills over into brutal proxy wars that have absolutely devastated other countries. And the most tragic example of this is the war in Yemen, a true humanitarian catastrophe fueled by the competing ambitions of these regional powers. And look, this isn't just some theoretical what-if scenario. The waters in and around the strait are a constant flashpoint for very real and very dangerous incidents. I mean, just look at this timeline from the last few years. It paints a pretty grim picture. We're seeing commercial tankers being seized, drone attacks, and tense standoffs between warships. This whole area is basically a tinderbox just waiting for a spark, where one miscalculation could lead to disaster. After that drone incident back in February 2026, the U.S. Military's Central Command, or CENTCOM, put out this statement. It's about as blunt a warning as you can get. It's a clear signal that the U.S. is absolutely prepared to use force to protect its ships and its interests. So, all of this brings us to the billion-dollar question, or maybe the trillion-dollar question: what would actually happen if Iran decided to make good on its threats and try to shut the whole thing down? Well, if a conflict broke out, you'd see this fascinating clash of military styles. On one side, Iran would use what's called asymmetric warfare. Think swarms of small, fast boats, anti-ship missiles, drones, sea mines, basically anything to create chaos and make it too dangerous for big ships. On the other side, the U.S. would bring its overwhelming conventional power. We're talking aircraft carriers, destroyers, fighter jets, the whole 9 yards. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, but why can't we just use pipelines to go around the strait? It's a good question, but the hard reality is we can't. As you can see from this chart, the few bypass pipelines that even exist are either broken, shut down, or just don't have anywhere near the capacity needed. And here's the bottom line. Even if you took every single working pipeline and ran them at their absolute max all day, every day, they still couldn't even handle half the oil that flows through Hormuz. There's just no getting around it. The world depends on that waterway.
So, if a conflict did kick off and the strait did get shut down, the consequences would be felt far, far beyond the Middle East. The ripple effect would be global.
Over 85% of all the crude oil that leaves the strait is headed for Asia. It is literally the lifeblood for the massive economies of China, India, Japan, and South Korea. A disruption to that supply would be absolutely devastating for them.
A shutdown would be like giving the global economy a sudden heart attack. Oil prices would go through the roof, which would trigger massive inflation. Global supply chains would seize up. But honestly, the scariest part? A regional fight could easily spiral into a much wider war, potentially pulling in other major powers like China and Russia. And that leaves us with this final, very sobering thought. In the world's most crowded, most contested, and most critical waterway, with tensions always simmering, how long can this fragile peace actually hold? Is a miscalculation inevitable?